Alright, working on the 2110 today. I had the head bolted on over here. I put the 180 barrel spacers on there, and I wasn't happy with the compression that I came up with. I don't think it was enough for the power that we want to make, so I decided to take the barrel spacers off from under the barrels, and we're going to incorporate an 80 thousandths copper gasket. And some of you guys have asked about these gaskets. This is just a piece of copper. Now, something really funny with these, they don't come with instructions like a lot of the old stuff used to. And you'll notice that when you take these out of the pack, they have a flat side and they have a rounded side. You always want to put the rounded side down towards the combustion chamber and the flat side up towards the barrel. And you'll have good luck. Now, I noticed some of these heads, you know, I've been bragging about CB being pretty decent quality, but this is something that I ran into. I had to fit these gaskets. This head's not cut as much as this one, so you can see that won't even fit in there. The barrel does fit in there. I have checked that, but drops in there, and they were tight over here, so I had to sand them and make them fit the head. You don't ever want to force those because you'll compromise them. You know, they're just copper. They need to lay flat in here to get a good seal. These are not recommended for the street. These are like a race item only. You know, you're going to have to retorque your head. Copper is going to give a little bit. I've been running these quite a bit on my race car. I've never had an issue with them. I'm going to try to get away with them on this car. This is sort of a street racer, pretty tight deal. You know, I'm expecting to have to maintenance this motor and go back into it. And you know, if it doesn't run in the 12s, it'll come back apart anyway and get a cam change. And I sort of use an experimental cam in here to try to get the both worlds where you could drive it and have a little power. But if it doesn't work out, then we'll just take it apart and put the standard issue FK89 in there and be done with it. I did have somebody ask me, I guess, you know, different people are watching different videos and people are doing different things, and you know, you have to make a decision on what you want as far as horsepower output. Most of my motors that I build are low horsepower motors, you know, like Greg Porter's 1915. It's probably 120 horse, you know, maybe 130 on a good day, depending on the carburetors. I think he's got some big K-drons on there. It runs pretty well. He's happy with it. He's been in service now for 3 years. We used a bunch of used parts, and he didn't start with anything like this. But his motor basically per se would be more dependable than this motor. I know that going into this. Anytime that you try to extract 180 horsepower, 190 horsepower out of something, you're going to hurt stuff. And there's going to be maintenance required, you know, valve springs, and we'll have to check it, make sure the balance is good and it's not eating the case up. So we'll probably put a couple races on it and then pull it back apart and see how it's living in there and what it looks like. And if we need to improve anything, then we can then. But this motor is sort of basically, you know, for the guy that we call and say, hey, I want a 12-second street car and I want to, you know, go Steak and Shake and terrorize my neighborhood. That's what this motor is. It's not really intended to be a long distance driver like Greg. You know, he drove his motor from Kansas to Florida and back, and he still continues to drive it, so that speaks pretty good for some longevity there. I don't know too many people that, you know, build Volkswagen motors that would tell you to go ahead and take a 7-state trip, but especially at speed, you know, he's not a 55-mile-an-hour guy. You know, he likes to drive 80 and 75, so he's torturing the thing the whole way. But there's things that I wouldn't put into that motor because I know it has to live. It can't come apart. You know, when you sell something to a customer, you don't really want them to have to service the engine unless you have that agreement going in. And you know, there are some customers like that, such as Noel. You know, he understands that he has to service his car, and he's going to have to take the motor apart and service the valve springs and leak the engine between races, and there's maintenance to be done. And there's things that you look for that preempted to a failure. We use an Oberg, so it traps any material in that screen. It's up to 3 microns. So you really get an idea of what's going bad. If you start losing the cam, it shows up in the screen right away. And if you lose the bearing, that shows up in the screen also. And I guess the debate is straight cut cam gears, you know, whether you should run them on the street or not. And in a situation like this, it's perfectly applicable. You know, the cam gears will give you about 2 to 3 horsepower. If you dynoed the motor, you would see 3 to 4 horsepower probably on the dyno. What it does is it takes the load off the cam and lets the cam turn freely in there. Has no resistance from the helix cut gear. And by I mean helix cut gear, it's cut sideways, so it's quieter. When you make a straight cut gear, it's obviously going to be noisier. The problem with running the straight cut cam gears on the street is it's very hard on the valve train. It transfers all the harmonics into the cam lifters and push rods and valve springs. And if you measured the valve springs, you'd see the big decrease in spring pressure. The spring obviously looks good when you take it apart and hold it in your hand. But if you did a spring pressure test, you would notice that the spring pressure would be depleted on the spring, and it's probably time for some new springs if you get any kind of mileage at all with a straight cut setup. We don't ever incorporate straight cut gears into a street motor that you're going to drive a lot. We didn't for 15 years down at Scooters. Obviously we sell Magnum gears down there. You know, if you get a race motor, that's what you get. But you're not getting a lot of street driving with a race motor. It's pull the starting line, make a blast, and you're shutting the car off. And I'll have you look at the case that's in question that my subscriber was watching one of another fellow Volkswagen guy's videos, and every lifter bore in the case was wiped out. And that's a direct effect from the straight cut gears. And you don't have to believe that or not, but I've seen it probably 100 times. It is a beautiful day. I might drive down the Scooters just to try to give you guys a little more material to look at. You know, when you look at motors here, there's not that many. When I worked at Scooters for 15 years, we built thousands of motors over that 15 years, and there's hundreds of engine cases on the wall out back with the lifter bores wiped out from motors that come in with straight cut cam gears on the street. And they just don't. It's you're setting yourself up for failure. You're going to wear your lifter. You're going to wear your lifter bores. You're going to wear your valve springs. It's going to be hard on valve train components. What happens is it translates all of that harmonics through the gear set into the valve train. So that whine that you hear that sounds so cool outside the car is going through the valve train components, and it's called harmonics, and harmonics can destroy an engine. If you guys are engine builders, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You run into it a lot on straight 6 motors. They try to heat themselves to death with the harmonics of the engine. That has to be all balanced out and got out with the dampener. And you'll notice a lot of you American car guys, what they've done in the American car field is they've gone to the belt drive setup for the high performance deals. If you're running a roller spring or you're running a lot of spring pressure and you run the timing chain, you know, most of the time you will lose valve springs pretty quick with the timing chain. And you'll notice that most of the serious race motors have a Jessel setup, and that's where they eliminate the chain and put a belt set up on there, and the belt's exposed in the front of the motor. If you go to the races, you'll see quite a few of them. And they actually take the timing chain and cover that with a plate, and then they bolt everything to the outside of the motor so you can actually see the belt in motion. And you can inspect it. It's not covered by a timing cover or anything. It's just out in the open there. And when you go to that belt, it almost eliminates all the translation of the harmonics through the camshaft out of the crank with that belt. The belt basically eats all the harmonics up and eliminates it. And that's why you see timing belts in use in a lot of the newer cars, the higher winding 4-cylinders and stuff. They've gone to a belt in lieu of the chain, because the chain always has translated that harmonics into the valve train. I did have one of my subscribers that has an American car, and he tried to put some of those, well, he put a straight cut gear set in his wife's car, and it went to killing the valve springs pretty quick in an American car. And usually if you have a hydraulic cam and you try to incorporate one of those, you're only dealing with 130 pounds of pressure on the seat to begin with, and it depletes that pretty quick. So unless you're running a, you know, a big ass badass spring, that's another thing in the race cars, we usually run so much spring pressure that we can afford to lose a little bit here and there. This is the typical setup for a race motor. And this is a K-Motion, I think it's a 149 is the size of the spring, the diameter. And these are 300 closed and 1100 open. So they have quite a bit of pressure on them, and you know, they have plenty to spare. They're not going to be hurt by any kind of straight cut gear setup. But that's one of the reasons they've had to go to such a big ass valve spring to make those motors live. And you know, the valve springs we're using on this motor are very healthy. These are the upgraded 650 spring with a titanium retainer. So these springs are good up to 630 lift, and they coil bind at 650. So at 630 I'll have more than enough. And one of the other things that you have to remember with these cylinder heads is, let me see if I can find this for you, because this is pretty cool. A lot of you guys don't even think about this aspect of it. But I gotta find the other intake valve that's up here. Pardon my mess. There it is. Let me set this off to the side. I had all that assembled and had to take it apart yesterday. So here's another thing that we do that a lot of people don't do. And there's the stock Volkswagen valves right over here. And here's the valves that we use. We use the Chevrolet valve. And it's 100 thousandths taller, so you get more spring travel, so you can run more lift. Volkswagen valve is obviously shorter there, and what happens is you have a shorter installed height because, you know, your valve's smaller. You have less stem area above the guide, and your installed height has to be tighter, which means narrower. And when we set them up tall, that means the valve's long, and we can put a lot of installed height on the spring, which gives it a lot of travel and lets it, you know, operate in a 600 lift area, which is pretty much where you're going to have to be if you want to make good power. You know, you'll have to be close to that. But that's another thing that we do. I know that Tom was asking me about the valves, and there you go. This is an LS valve, and this is a, you know, Volkswagen. So some of the Fords and some of the aftermarket head companies have gone to 8mm stems, so it's opened up our market a little bit on what we can use for valves, and that's considerably a big help when you're trying to add installed height and get valve spring travel, is to add a longer valve to the motor. So that's something that the CB heads have incorporated in them. It's a good feature, and it's one of the things that makes them better than the competitors. A lot of the guys are still using Volkswagen castings with Volkswagen valves and stuff, and you can't get the proper installed height to run the camshaft big enough to make proper power. So somebody else said that this is going to seriously, kill the dependability of the head. I've never seen a guide come out of a CB head yet, so I wouldn't really worry about the depreciation of dependability from removing the valve guide boss, but this is something that has to be removed if you're going to make any kind of power. And if you bought any kind of Fumio or badass Berg heads, not street stuff but race stuff, this is gone. What a lot of people don't realize is we're standing here looking at this wedge port head, and this is very similar to the Berg design from the 80s and 90s. And some people argue that somebody took a Berg head and actually CNC'd it and copied it into this head. And I know there was a little bit of animosity going on there when these first came out between Clyde and CB Performance. So you know that's probably true. But you always have had to have this type of port if you want to make any kind of power. Usually if the valve guide boss is still in there and you know, you have a relatively small port, you're going to be sort of limited to 100 to 120 horsepower. You have to have area if you want to go fast, and cylinder heads are 100% what is responsible for the horsepower on a motor. So if you're not willing to spend the money on the cylinder heads, you're never going to make any power. I mean, some guys' idea of power is completely different than other guys, but I'm talking, you know, like 12-second power, 180 horsepower power. You're going to need a decent port. So you're either going to need an ultra wedge or a wedge port. And if you look at the race heads like we run, the eliminator heads like these that I still haven't set the tom over here, you know, these have the super long valve, and these are set up for the Chevy spring, for the big ass spring. So these are the step up from that head. You know, this is like an all-out 200 horsepower head. If you you know, we're just gonna race your car and you wanted to make some serious power, these would be a good choice. These come, you can get these CNC ported. I ported these myself. They have them in a couple different versions, but the head is spread out so you can get a bigger valve in here and have more area between the valves too. So you can get a pretty large valve in these heads. But that's just some of the things, the difference between a race motor and a street motor. This is more of a street head here. You know, this is probably more typical of what a lot of guys use. So here we go. Let's do a comparison here. Let me move this cylinder head out of the way. And here's a really good comparison of probably what's out there more than this. This is more what people are steered to buy, because more people have these. You can only get these one place. You can get them a couple places, but you know, the suppliers are sort of limited, and this type of head is available everywhere. But this is typically what the average Volkswagen guy would be sold if he went in and said, hey, I want a larger valve head. These come with double valve springs. Again, they're going to be the Volkswagen valves. So the valve spring is set up very short, you can see there. Not a lot of installed height. We've got all the bosses in place in the port. These ports are 30% larger by volume than a stock port, but still this head will never produce near the power that this head's going to produce, and the valve size is close to the same. So it's not just the valve size that makes the horsepower. You got to have flow to make it go, is what I like to say. And if you don't open these ports up, you're going to be limited to a low horsepower motor. It's just how it is. You have to have intake flow to make the numbers that you're going to want to make. You'll never see any dyno shootouts with the set of Volkswagen casting heads on it with a traditional port. They're always going to be ported out of the port, is what I like to say. In the old days, we would have had to take and weld this whole cylinder head up and then poured out of the original OEM port so you get the shape that we wanted. And now through the advent of CNC machines, we're able to buy that pretty much right off the shelf. I took these apart and did a little work on them, but that's pretty much what you get right off the shelf. And you can see the amount of valve that you can see there. You can almost see the whole valve, and you can see you're quite a bit choked down here. And this is no different than like a NASCAR when they go to a restrictor track. This would be a restrictor head, and that would be haul ass head. So there's always going to be a restriction with a stock port, and you're only going to make so much power, and it's not going to be very fast. I can tell you, if you use a head like this, you're almost always going to be stuck in the 14s. You see those guys a lot. and that's not what I want, and that's not usually what people that I do stuff for want. You know, I'm lucky enough to be involved with a couple 5-second cars right now, and there's not a lot of 5-second cars in the country. You know, there's probably a handful, and that comes from horsepower. You know, we don't have a light car. A lot of people would like to say, hey, the car's light. Well, the car weighs 1,550 pounds when we race it at a Pro Mod event, because they scale the car every run, and it has to weigh 1,550 pounds with an intercooler. If you don't run an intercooler, you can run 1,500 pounds. But you're still dealing with a fairly heavy car. You know, at 1,550 pounds, that's a bunch of metal to be moving down the strip. And there's a lot of cars that are much lighter than that. But anyway, there's a little bit of difference, and you know, a badass street head and a mild street head. This head's never going to produce any kind of you know, net breaking horsepower. It'll run good. It'll run really well. And I would probably do a little more port work to these before I put them on. I wouldn't just put them on stock. The reason I bought these heads is because of the casting. You know, they have the solid lugs all the way through in the stud holes. They have really nice spark plugs in them. They're just super nice casting. These are the Revmaster castings, and they have a couple people that are selling them, but apparently, I don't know if they're still available or not, but apparently these hold up pretty well on the street, and people have had pretty good luck with them. They have pretty decent cooling. They're open pretty well, and that's another thing on this head. You'll see this head's solid. There is no cooling per se. I've seen some people where they go through and they cut all these passages open, and it's not able to do on this head because it's all solid. And so that's one of the things. This will run a little hotter than this head for sure, and this will be more towards the you know, hot street, and this is more towards the dependable drive it to Kansas City performance here. You know, you give up a little bit when you want real power, and there's no way around that unless you build a 4-inch bore motor and you know, replace the cylinder head with displacement, and those run pretty well. There's a couple companies that are building those, but you have to send your case off, send your heads out, have the studs relocated, and it's a pretty expensive process. I understand a lot of guys, what they do is they order these heads with no stud holes in them, and then they just make their own holes where they want them, and you can get a pretty sweet motor that way. So if you're looking for some really big horsepower and dependability, a 4-inch bore type deal might be a setup for you to look at if you have that type of budget. And those 4-inch bore motors run really well. It's basically a small block Chevy piston. So that's a little difference in cylinder heads. My opinion on the straight cut cam gears, I would never incorporate those into a street motor. If you are planning on getting any kind of longevity out, those will definitely cause you to split the case prematurely and service the lifter bores or the valve train. You will have translation issues from the harmonics that those gears produce. So that's my opinion on it. You can take whoever's advice you'd like. You know, I've been doing this for quite a while. I've built hundreds and hundreds of motors, and I pretty much know exactly what it takes to do what you want to do. And whether you want to buy those parts or not, that's two different things. But I have no problem picking a combination and going to the track and making the scoreboard light up with a number that I had in mind. But you have to buy the proper parts if you want to make the proper power, and there's just no way around it. You're not gonna take a head off like this and put a head on like this and make any kind of horsepower at all. Port design is everything, and this is a lot of horsepower here, and without that you're just not going to make any power. The cylinder head definitely limits the power potential of the motor for sure. And you know, these heads have some really nice features in them that make the valve train live a little longer. You know, with the longer installed height and the longer valve, it makes the spring happier. You're not mashing it as far. If you tried to open this one 600 lift compared to this one, this spring would be coiled bind at the bottom of the travel, because we're short 100 thousandths of travel because the valve's too short. So that's why we use these Chevy valves and upgrade to the CB heads. They have a lot of good features on them right from the get-go. Even if you don't buy the wedge ports, if you buy the, they have a set of CNC port ovals. That's what we use on the race car. You can buy those heads individually. You don't have to buy them in sets. These have to be bought in sets. And we were going at it with the mindset that we're probably going to burn a head off the car and have to buy a cylinder head. And we wanted to be able to buy one head. And I think we've killed one head. And the second head that we bought is held up pretty good. I forget what kind of failure we had. It either I think it dropped the valve spring, broke a valve spring, dropped the valve, and you know, totally foobarred the combustion chamber in the one cylinder head. Next time I'm at Knowles, I'll take a little video of it and show you the damage. But those CNC round port heads work very well. You can get the 650 valve spring package on them. They have the longer valves from the factory, and it's probably a good way to go if you're gonna put any kind of camshaft in your motor. This is something to really consider, is the extra length of the valve is a really nice feature over the Volkswagen type valve. Plus you get a much better robust keeper when you go to the single groove rather than the 3-groove keeper. The way it locks into the groove is much superior over the 3-groove type deal. So those are a few things to consider if you're going to buy cylinder heads. And if you're expecting big power, you're going to need something like this. And if you want moderate power, you know, you're going to drive it a lot, I would go something like this. But this is not going to be a drive it in the country type motor. I won't be going for road trips or anything. We'll just be, you know, racing stoplight to stoplight, going to the drag strip on the weekends, and going to the Volkswagen cruise-ins during the week. That's the only reason I'm building this motor. So that's a little take on it. It's a little bit of the dependability difference between a street motor and an all-out street motor. This is probably one step under a race motor, basically. And you guys know, if you race, we take those motors apart. You know, we probably run our motors a lot longer than most people do. I think Knowles got some motors that have over 100 passes on them, and we haven't taken them apart. We usually concentrate on brake and transmissions. That's our specialty. And the engines don't seem to be too much of an issue. So we did hurt Knowles' motor. You guys saw that. We broke a lifter. And, you know, that's from lack of valve spring. You know, anytime that you wad a push rod up or break a lifter in a turbo motor, it's because you got more boost in the cylinder than the spring can overcome, and it won't open the valve. And that's where the wadded up push rods and broken lifters come from. And normally that's a good sign that your ignition system isn't burning the fuel in the cylinder. It's partially a hydraulic deal and a pressure deal on the back side of the valve. We don't go real excessive with the valve springs because we like to keep them sort of light. You know, it makes the cams live. And the number one thing that makes cam wipe out is the double springs. And when you add a triple or a Chevy spring to it, it just accelerates it. You know, so it's a battle with these motors for sure. The camshaft is definitely the wear item in here, and I don't think that, you know, I'm alone with this. If you talk to a lot of people, they'll tell you, you know, if you want dependability, try to go with a single spring. And you can only make so much power with a single spring is the only problem. You know, you can make some decent power, but if you're going to want 12-second power in a sedan, you're going to have, you know, a decent spring and a decent cam, and you're going to have to be able to turn the motor up, you know, 8,000 RPM. So that's what we're striving for here. This will be much more a little bit on the higher compression side now without the barrel spacers. But the barrel spacers were just too much. It gave me 250 thousandths deck, and that's just the compression's way too low. I mean, I'm sure this motor would live a lot better like that. It would be much easier on it. But we want to produce the power, and we're going to have a little compression to do that. So we had to make a little adjustment there. I'm going to do away with the barrel spacers. I'll try to get this bolted together today. I got both my intake manifolds done. So I got those all finished up, looking good. And here's the other one. Well, those look good all the way through, of course. No shortcuts. There's no shortcuts for making horsepower. So you You can't leave anything unturned. But anyway, that's what's happening here today. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. A little yard work yesterday out here. Oh, it's just a beautiful day in Florida. There's not a cloud in the sky. Good day for the convertible to go for a ride. But I did a little mulch, some mulch around the trees, spruce up the dirt and the weeds, and made Andrea a little driveway here because she kept killing the grass. All her friends coming over for coupons, you know. It's like a crack house. So I put this down. Maybe it'll let the grass grow back a little bit. It'll hold some moisture. And cut some trees down. Got rid of all those mulch bags. And working on filling that dumpster back up. We got to work on the old motorhome this weekend and get some of that cut up. And get this trailer moved around back. And stuff like that. That's what's happening. I've been wanting to go down to Key West for a little while, so I don't know, might do that. Might be going on a little trip and get some beautiful weather for it. I know the girls are on spring break, and I think they'd have a good time down there in the Keys. So I tried to get a spot in John Penny Camp State Park, and it's booked solid past April. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but we might be able to find somewhere down there to camp. So that might be coming up. Get out of here, do a little stress reducer trip, you know. Hans welded his header up the other night and didn't put the welder away. He's about got his motor assembled in there, and it looks pretty sexy. Let me go show you that real quick. We have to go into his lair, so let me open the door here. Go into his room. He's not home. You won't mind. Let me plug his floodlight in here. Hang on a minute. There we go. Well, ready to go. Got the new header on there. Relocated the turbo out in front of the motor a little bit, so it's not right up against the master cylinder anymore. We'll be running a better downpipe now. He was sort of limited on what he could run, but couple new chains in there. Got the new Tommy cams. Of course, the cylinder head I did for him. Got the rev kit in there for the rocker arms, and yeah, it's a nice little oil bar here for the camshaft. It's pretty sexy. That's sort of what I want to do for the valve springs on the Volkswagens. I want to put something like this in the top of the valve cover and spray the valve springs. I think that will make them live a little longer. Get some oil splashing on them. You know, we're limited to the oil that's carried to the top of the motor with the push rods, and I don't think that's enough. I think this kind of setup here on the valve springs would dramatically increase the valve spring life. I have friends that are only getting 200-300 miles out of a set of good valve springs, but they're trying to drive, you know, a cam with over 600 lift on the interstate.